I'm Geoff's timed it perfectly. So I'm just I now know what Jan feels like sometimes when I come onto our coffee chats at the very last minute. But it's with relief and pleasure that I see Geoff smiling, and I've hopefully teed you up, Geoff, for showing how
Have you?
GDPR
Oh, brilliant.
is very important at the moment for business as usual, and the whole crisis at the moment has created some threats when people have their attention has been on other requirements of data, and allows some other people, those malign people, to slip under the surface if we let our guard drop. So I will. I note with interest on your windowsill the letters LOL, which
Yeah.
is probably very pertinent.
Yeah, you have to basically you have to have a
It's a
sense of
very good
humor.
idea. Over to you, Geoff.
Thank you very much. So,
I've heard many things from Steve about you, and I'm looking forward to
have
listening to
you?
what you're going to say.
Oh,
Cheers.
wow. Okay. Well, no pressure then. Thank
No
you.
pressure
So,
at all.
hello everyone, and yeah, thank you for inviting me to come along and talk. Now, I'm mindful this is the half 1 session, so this is either post lunch or with lunch. So, and it's data protection. Wow, it's brilliant. So, my intention with this is to kind of make it sort of informative but conversational. So, kind of a light-hearted, sort of thought-provoking session is what I'm intending. Feel free to put in the comments if I don't achieve that. All right, if you can't answer 2 out of 5, Geoff, I'm happy with that. I just thought I'd set out what my intention is. I'm going to talk for about half an hour, and then hopefully open up for some Q&A.
Thank you
I
very
have a
much.
share thing somewhere that I can share my screen. So here we go. And
There you go. I can see something now, Geoff.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. So hopefully you can see a big one. Now I've called this a Data Protect 2021 forecast. That's actually rather grand. These are observations from me as a privacy professional around things I think that we should keep an eye on during the course of this year and things that are worth watching. I used forecast mainly because I found that picture and I loved it, and I thought, oh, how can I? I'll call this a forecast. It's January after all. So maybe there's some storm clouds, maybe there's some calm ahead. I don't know. Before I move into the breadth of this discussion, what I'd like everyone in the audience, everyone watching this to do right now is if you could think about what data protection means to you. And why it's important, and that could be from a number of contexts, either from your profession, and I know there are a number of data analysts and data professionals out there, so it could be from your professional capacity, but also from what it means from a societal perspective for a citizen and also a consumer. If you could just have a think about that, and I'll quickly formally introduce myself. Picture of me pre the lockdown beard. And in black and white and outdoors, which was nice. I am a data protection officer. I've got 32 years operational experience, which is a polite way of saying I'm in my 50s. I have worked across multiple sectors, predominantly in banking. So I spent 20 years in a large bank. So I'm a recovering banker. But I have worked, and that is where, I mean, I came from an operation and sales and retail kind of background, but that is where I, during the start of the turn of the millennium, I was introduced into the world of data and working directly with data. From there, I've worked in local government, I've worked with public health, national health, social care agenda. I've worked with utilities, logistics, insurance, hospitality, and more recently with a number of fintech type startups. So that's kind of my world. Yes, I've been freelancing for the last 6 or 7 years. Just helping companies. I mean, obviously, there's been a lot of GDPR readiness in there, but also helping companies kind of understand how to evolve and develop some more sustainable models for use of personal data, and trustworthy models. As well as that, I also have an association with a university. So a little bit of a pitch for Loughborough University, fantastic organisation. I have had an association for about 10 years in their Centre for Information Management. There's an element of research around privacy and ethics there, and I also do some teaching too. Okay, so that's me. So first thing I'm going to talk about is regulation and international data transfers. This is a big thing this year for data protection professionals. And it was all sort of thrown up in the air a bit last year, thanks to a gentleman called Matt Schrenz, who I'm going to talk about in a minute. Before I launch this, obviously I asked the question at the start, about what data protection means to you. And you may have all said a number of different things. You may have said, oh, GDPR. You may have said it's about security and confidentiality. You may have said, actually, it's around consent and choice. You may have said it's about trust and control. And you're right, it's about all of those things. And that is the challenge that data protection and that we face in a regulatory environment. It's about a number of different things. For me, fundamentally, it's about using my personal data for the betterment of me and potentially the community and society around me. And I talk about the community more locally and then society more generally. That's what I think of data protection, is how do I get use of my data to do all of those things? Yes, it is about transacting, it is about provision of utility, it is about, entertainment, but it's about some of those other things as well. And how do I actually am able to exercise my choice and control? Because my view might be very different to someone else's, and also balance it with my right to be able to express myself. Those are all the real sort of kind of intertwined complexities within what data protection means. And that is the challenge, because we have a global community of different values and perspectives. And I mean that globally. You're not just, on this site here, but actually globally. And when we look at services nowadays, when we go on the internet and we buy things, inevitably that transaction is spanning, a number of different countries. And that presents quite a significant challenge. And we saw that. We saw that with the early adoption, 10 years or so ago of big tech, and as consumers being foisted with tech agreements either from a Chinese or from a US-based technology company, because we're operating in a bit of a void, without the understanding that actually, as a European or someone in the UK, I have a set of values that I want to protect and uphold. And that was, that comes from the Article 8 of the Human Rights Act. We have a right to private home life, and that's where data protection law is embedded in, where it comes from. So I just thought I'd explain that, because it's interesting to understand that, and it's also important because the law doesn't just, everyone thinks data protection, GDPR, but it's not the be all and end all. There is more to that, and there is actually an expectational set there. And yeah, GDPR happened. It built on what was already existing. It's raised the bar, primarily because it took a stick. There's a principle of accountability. There's a 4% fine, if you get it wrong, for companies. So it actually focused minds, but it has actually raised the standard globally. And this is quite an amazing statement as someone in the data protection profession, to say that I expect in the next 2 years, 2/3 of the globe will be covered by a modern privacy regulation. And what that means is a comprehensive privacy regulation that is of a standard or a level to GDPR. Now, prior to that, and if we say, well, GDPR was conceived in 2012, ratified in 16, and enforced in 18, in the period sort of 2012 to 2016, if I look at adequacy and where there was a level of adequacy of what they call comprehensive data protection law that matched what we had in the UK and Europe at that time, I mean, you could have one hand, you could have counted it on one, and it was the usual suspects. It was the likes of Canada and New Zealand. It wasn't Argentina or Uruguay or Brazil. It really wasn't those nations. And to see the evolution of data protection law across the globe is fascinating to see. It's not the same everywhere, and there are different things that are acceptable in different places, but it is still interesting to see this evolution, and it will continue and continue. But the law only gets you so far, and I'll talk about that in a little while. What we're going to see in the early part of 2021, there will be a law in India. So historically, India's had a law that sort of protects IT, which kind of covers data security. There will be data privacy law in India. So the largest democracy in this, on the planet, will have privacy rights, which is a fantastic thing to see, and a very interesting for the outsourcing market, because it kind of starts to make life a lot easier for some of the contractual arrangements that we put in place. It doesn't mean to say they'll get adequacy straight away, but it does mean actually we can start to raise, make life easy for that data flow and for the flow to service, consumers. I've put e-privacy. I put this every year in January, for the last 3 years. But e-privacy get ratified this year. Just to explain what e-privacy is. In the UK, it's ratified. It's PECA. It's the Privacy and Electronic Communication Regulation. It's the cookie thing. Okay, so those of you in telecoms will know about this law because you have all sorts of extra requirements around anonymization and metadata. The legislation or regulation, as it will be updated. It's been proposed within the EU. I think it will be ratified in the UK as well, because we're all at the same standard across the European Economic Area, so there's no real reason why it wouldn't. It's widening its scope, so it's historically been focused on telecom, so it'll include social media and some of the big tech companies. The big thing really is around, from a data perspective, is around the cookie laws. Now, the intention of the regulation was to simplify the cookie laws. So rather than facing those rather annoying cookie walls that just, you just say yes and you give up your rights to everything and people just track you to death because all I wanted to do was buy something, and you're in the way to click, or I just wanted to search something, click. It will remove some of that and actually just say that actually all of the cookies that are non-privacy intrusive, and from an analytics perspective, you'll understand those are the things that that are essential, that keep the site working, but also some of the analytics and performance things that are non-intrusive, the things that I would have done in a physical shop. I would have watched, where do my consumers go, and did they look at that shelf or not that shelf. All of those things will stay. I mean, they're not, and they won't require consent. The purpose of this is to provide consent for the third-party things, so all of the trackers and the marketing add-ons. Okay, that's the intention, and it's also intended that that will be set within a browser, so you'll be able to do those controls in the browser. The European Court of Justice have expressed an opinion, though, in the last few years, that actually, when it comes to cookies, if there's a cookie dropped on a device, then I should give consent for that, irrespective of what that cookie is. So that's the only caveat I'll throw in there. It'll be interesting to see. I'm expecting to see something on e-privacy, though, and hopefully we can try to start to sort out and unwind the mess that we've got at the minute with cookie laws, because it's not helpful, and it does mask other elephants in the room, things like some of the things that happen in the ad tech industry, real-time bidding, which are quite opaque to the end user, and quite, actually, I would suggest privacy intrusive. And I'm not trying to, if you're from a DSP, I'm not trying to demonize what you do. What you do is very legitimate. It's the model and the mode, actually, that I've got some issues with, and the broadcast of data in that environment. So we'll keep an eye on that. We have the EU Data Governance Act. This was just announced at the end of last year. This is beyond personal data protection, but it's really looking to set across the European Union a data sharing, almost a big data sharing agreement about all data. Early days yet, not quite sure how it looks when it comes to consent, but we'll see. But it's just an interesting concept that they're looking at proposing an act for data governance more broadly than what's in the personal data regulations with GDPR. Now, the two big elephants in the room from a global data privacy perspective, we have China and we've got the United States. Yeah, obviously. Now, China, this is quite interesting. China are proposing this PIPL, it's called, which is a Data Protection and Privacy Act. Now, what it'll look like in China, I'm not quite sure. If I, and if I explain, I don't know if any of you are familiar with how things operate in China, but social media in China, they use WeChat as the mode of, that's your Facebook in China. If you've got a big following and you post something positive about the CCP, in China, you get lots of likes and everyone's, oh yeah, that's great. And you are actually you are potentially going to be provided with, you get rewards from the CCP. So you get access to, from the Communist Party, you get access to, improved health services, or access to a holiday, or some kind of remediation for you. You get some sort of recompense for doing that, which is fantastic in some ways, but a little weird in others. Any of you that have watched Black Mirror, the Black Mirror series, will be familiar that actually there's an element here of fiction and reality almost merging, because it is a bit creepy, it is a bit weird, and how far does that line go? But that is accepted practice in China, as is I know that I saw a story a year or so back around their faces. If you jaywalk in, it's illegal to jaywalk in China. If you cross the road, if you jaywalk, they have cameras everywhere. They'll pick it up and they'll post that on a billboard, and billboards nearby your face will be posted, and it's there to kind of just shame you. Doesn't always work with tech, because a member of the administration there had their face posted on a billboard in Shanghai, and they were in Beijing at the time. And what had happened is their face was on the side of a bus, and the cameras had picked it up, and the tech had said, "Oh, it's jaywalked," and then one of the chairman of the associate was posted everywhere. But it's just a different environment. blend that, with what happens in the US. Now, the US is interesting, and we're going to get to the US now. We generally feel like we're quite similar value sets to the United States, and they do have privacy written into their constitution. The challenge is how it blends with the Patriot Act and the fact that in US law they protect the house first, and then the individuals sort of come later. And everything's done at a state or sectoral level. So they do have privacy regulation around health data. So they have HIPAA. So it's very sectoral. It's not comprehensive to all. California have reacted, and mainly driven by the tech industry there and their need to meet GDPR and a number of antitrust lawsuits as well that were being faced within California. So California have now released the CCPA, which is a Consumer Privacy Act in California. There are others, Washington State, Oregon, I believe there's one in New York and New Jersey being proposed as well. What we really need, just to make life easier, is a US federal bill. Now, the previous administration blocked any discussion of that. I've had a conversation literally in the last week with some compatriots of mine over in the US, and they believe that the conditions are right now within Congress and the White House for this conversation to start to happen about potentially getting a US federal bill on privacy that will give some form of privacy, comprehensive privacy law that spans the entire United States. Why that's important? It's important because data exchange transatlantically has been very difficult, particularly over the last decade. We've seen there was a condition called safe harbor, which was a mechanism used. That was obliterated by a gentleman called Max Schrems, and similarly enough, Privacy Shield, which replaced it, has also been obliterated by him. He took a case against Facebook. It went to the European Court of Justice, and they ruled that Privacy Shield could not be relied on, mainly because of what happens within the US, laws around surveillance, around what their security service is, and you'll be familiar with Snowden and what he exposed. That's the main concern in Europe. Okay. So transatlantic data transfers technically are illegal, although we've got a bit of a stay of absence because the Data Protection Commissioner in Ireland slapped a stop processing notice on Facebook. They've then appealed that and said you can't do that to us. So that's actually winding through a court process again, and it's giving the European Union an opportunity to revisit its current transfer mechanisms, and these are called standard contractual clauses. So they will be updated. You'll hear a lot of news around this. You'll hear quite a lot from your data protection legal counsel and data protection officers in your various organizations around data exchange and what's acceptable, what's not. And it may well be that there may need to be a revisiting around some of the commercial arrangements you have in place, because there will be greater onus put on data controllers. Okay, so that's my expectation there. So there might be an element of some due diligence actually that will need to be acted upon over a period of time in order to validate these things. The other fly in the ointment is Brexit. Just when we thought Brexit was done, it's still valid. We have now become a third country in the eyes of Europe, and so that means that we have to achieve adequacy, which seems bizarre because we've implemented GDPR. We have Data Protection Act 2018. We've done that. We've met all of those conditions, but we still need to get an adequacy agreement now. Through the agreement, the transition deal, the trade and cooperation agreement, we've got an extension of 6 months, so that it doesn't affect data flows for the next 6 months. And in that time, we need to be focused on getting a deal or getting some agreement around adequacy. Now, I'm optimistic it'll happen personally, and it's just a gut feel. That's all I can give you at the minute. It's just a gut feel. And the rationale, we've declared adequacy from a UK to Europe, so it only really affects flows coming from Europe into data centers into the UK. We have the same regulation. The ICO have demonstrated themselves, I think, to be a functioning regulator. They've issued as much, probably more enforcement than most of the other regulators in Europe, and at a higher level. So they've demonstrated their ability to act. So I think we have a good program there. The things that probably might cause an issue is the ECJ. In the past, they've raised concerns around the Investigatory Powers Act under the Snoopers Charter and what might happen from a security perspective, and where our security services might share data. So typically we work very closely with Australia and the US, who don't have adequacy arrangements with the EU. So I think those are the things that probably would be a concern. All I can say is, having had a quick look at the Trust and Cooperation Agreement, there are some exemptions in there around law enforcement, which kind of, in my mind, gives me a glowing feel that I think those things will be overcome and we will get the deal we need on adequacy. It's not guaranteed, it's a gut feel. Okay. But watch this space, because that hopefully will, we will hear some news over that over the next 6 months. Also domestically, we'll get a new UK Information Commissioner. So Elizabeth Denham will be standing down during the course of this year. So we'll see a slight change in approach, potentially. What I do expect is there will be more regulation. There will be more fines, and that's inevitable. I think we've had a settling in and grace period. I think the regulator will be getting tougher. Okay, I mean, we've had, and we're fortunate that I think, I mean, I've worked with a number of the regulators, around, particularly around Europe. I think the ICO are very pragmatic and actually generally quite a business friendly organisation to deal with as best they can. They really do try, but there is an element of upholding a regulation, and I think where fines will come, yes, they'll still come off the back of breaches. So where you see data breaches, I think the big cases, issues will be where organizations haven't met their reasonable accountability levels. And what I mean by that is, the whole concept around data minimization and storage limitation. I think that's one of the larger liabilities out there at the minute, is that kicking the can down the road around getting processing practice that only processes the data it needs and doesn't hold on to stuff forever. And it's really difficult, because it's a difficult technical thing to do. If you're in a large bank and you've got huge legacy, probably that's understandable. But I've seen storage issues in very relatively new companies as well. So I think it's an opportunity probably this year to start to clear some of those things out and focus on that. So that's regulation and international data transfers. Next thing, obviously I can't talk about data protection without security threats. I'm going to caveat, I'm not a cyber security expert, so any technical questions on anything cyber I may struggle with, but this is just, this is the thing, an obvious observation really, is the whole distributed workforce now, all of us working from home. We've seen a rise during the pandemic of scams and threats and all sorts of phishing activity. I've had one today actually from some email in my inbox purporting to be DHL about a package that I'm not even expecting, and asking me to click a link and pay £2.50. I've had that today, and we've seen all the ones from HMRC. There is an increase in that threat. I've called it homage to Roald Dahl. The vicious canids are just malicious. All of those malicious. Explaining it to my children when they were younger, and one of them said, "Oh, you mean the vicious canids?" Yeah, that'll do if that's what holds. But these are all of the lone actors, organized crime gangs, government things, bots, all of those. There is a greater potential and a greater threat. I see two things happening: an upscaling in effort to secure networks and access control, and the automation of detection and analytics within all of security programs. And I've spoken to a number of CISOs who are doing that. See, deployment of machine learning kind of tools to help with data loss prevention and egress, to stop that kind of stuff happening, and to monitor people's behavior and just challenge them, because it's challenging. If you're trying to work, you're on, we're all on calls longer, we're all trying to homeschool, and it could be that I've just pushed the wrong button and sent something at the wrong place at the wrong time. So I'm seeing a greater technical effort in security. Interestingly as well, from conversations I've had, is that investment in culture is also important. Distributed workforce means that people are even more important piece, because they're not actually in your environment anymore. They don't necessarily have that water cooler moment to offload or voice their opinion and make their voice heard. So how do you do that? They're being expected to do more because schools are closed at the minute, and and life's just and anyone that's starting to that was likely to become disenfranchised with your organization is a threat to your organization, because there are so many more people out there now that understand, actually, I'll try and connect with an individual through social media, and I can try and socially engineer them in some way, or get them to actually act on my behalf. It makes people more vulnerable. So there is an importance in investment in culture, and I see that. And that's certainly something I'm hearing from CISOs as I talk to them. And focused on culture, and this is an interesting thing now, hopefully, is that there's also, I think, a sea change potentially with our digital culture and how we operate online. And in the last 12 months, and I think this will continue, we'll start to see a growth in cautious users leading to an increase in more privacy-focused services. And it's because of a number of things, okay? And these are all things I hear. People don't like surveillance culture. They don't understand how to exercise control over the data. They have a digital twin, either that data I've provided, data that's observed, or data that's derived about me. But there is a digital twin there that I don't know if I actually get a sense of value or understanding of. Opaque practice. There are still many opaque business practices. There's not enough transparency around the decision I'm making, which creates a paradox around my consent and control. So going with the cookies, I give consent, but I actually don't know what I'm really giving consent or how I even control that. So I've given choice that's lawful, but does it really meet my requirement? I don't know. And at some stage you see it may be a breach of social or moral contract and an erosion of trust. And I have some case examples I just want to quickly touch on if I can. Big blue thing at the top there is the first one, and it's the easy one because WhatsApp's probably on everyone's mind at the minute. We've all faced a WhatsApp privacy notice, those of us that use it. Many people are now jumping off WhatsApp and jumping to Signal, and that's what that blue. And I just want to say, I've used Signal for about a year. It was me and 4 peers in privacy that were using it. In the last week, all I've seen is literally 10 a day or 12 a day, ping, 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 notification, so-and-so, and your contact is now using Signal. And when I ask people, why have you jumped onto this? Oh, because I hate this privacy notice of WhatsApp. What do you hate about it? Oh, they're sharing data with Facebook, they say. And well, they've been part of the Facebook regime for a while. I know, but I thought it was an end-to-end encrypted, secure and private messaging system. I don't mind, government surveillance maybe from a security perspective, if that's what's needed. But broadly, I thought it was beyond the remit of advertisers. And of course, what WhatsApp are going to do, what they've said in their privacy statement, is that they will use facial recognition, personal photos, and also remember this includes Instagram. Instagram's also part of this group. Keyword search for advertising purposes. This will be shared across their whole environment, and there's no opt-out. There's either you accept this or don't use the app. There isn't really well, actually, I want to opt out of that service, or actually, I would like an element. WhatsApp haven't done that. You could argue, well, it's free. What do you expect? Well, possibly. That's a fair argument, and Signal's open source, but they operate, very much like Wikipedia on a funded basis. So you can volunteer to donate to them if you want to. It's just interesting that what I've seen, a reaction is almost a breach of the social or the contract that people thought they had with WhatsApp's broken. And there are also other people saying, well, I don't use Facebook. Why the hell are Facebook getting this data? Because there's this misunderstanding around who owns what. And also people are expressing a general concern of, well, Facebook already have a massive silo of data. Why do they need more? Yeah, so I'm hearing that as well. So that's an interesting case study. I don't know what numbers Signal are trading at the minute, but they must have their subscription, particularly in the UK, must be exponential to what it has been. The other thing just to consider in the UK as well around Facebook is that we've all been put onto the Californian contracts. So we were on Irish, European-based contract legally. That's now been changed. Facebook have all sorts of legal reasons for that, but that again makes people, it just a misconception in people's minds around why are they doing that. Is that means that they can open up even further data, and I think there just needs to be a bit more transparency around that decision-making process and how that's used, I think. But that's an interesting case study. Another one I've got. So in the top here, we've got Majik and Hoobly and Quant and DuckDuckGo. These are all search engines that don't track, so they don't profile. So nowadays, if you use Google, inevitably you're going to be tracked and profiled. Every time you use the internet, that's how all these little ads appear when you use social media as well. These guys don't do that. They do sell advertising space, but it's based on a search parameter, so it's not based on personal footprint. It's small. DuckDuckGo equate to about 2% during the course of the last year. I think it's about 2% of all searches. So they're minnows compared to Google, but their growth is exponential, and their growth is exponential, and within some interesting demographics as well, because it tends to be people with a sort of level 6 upwards education standard, so degree upwards, and they tend to be, it's very popular with the demographic of what I call the kind of late millennials, old Gen Z, so 25 to 35. There's a big push of users and uptaking and using DuckDuckGo, to the extent that Apple have considered buying it and acquiring DuckDuckGo as part of its suite. And it's that, I think, it's an interesting endorsement in the use of privacy enhanced tooling and the community that are going to go that way, because I think that's an eye opener really for all of us as we develop services and we think about our shared wealth, you know, within our data communities. What else have I got here? I've got Trello. That's a collab tool, so that's kind of a privacy focused collab tool. So kind of, if you don't want to use Google Docs, we've got Diaspora and Zing, which are kind of a competitor with, so they're kind of like a Facebook, LinkedIn type of service. I've got Jitsi, which is the little I don't know, it's a genie. I think it's a genie. They're a distributed sort of a Zoom competitor, as are Whereby. Really easy to set up and use, really good privacy control, so that, you know, you want to access data or port data, they provide access to that, you know, and it's all native, it's all part of the native service. Interesting case I also want to look at in the new breed are the ones in the middle, and these are pods. Now, you may or may not, some of you may have heard, Tim Berners-Lee in the last year or so has started to express his caution around, his observation around what's happened on the web and how things have turned out and the power of the big tech. Yeah, and we're looking at Facebook, Google, Amazon, you know, and Apple, and to an extent Twitter, you know, and looking at, well, there are these massive silos now of personal data. Is that what we intended? Did we intend for these big behemoths to have all of this level of control? And actually, no, we didn't. And so there's, he's been working on a project called Solid, which was an open source project. I believe we're working with NHS data, looking at trying to decentralize the internet. So trying to, if you like, kind of create a more distributed model. So similar to how blockchain works in a way that you have this sort of distributed ledger. So rather than big silos, you have small concepts of personal data, these little pods, these little sort of personal online data stores that can be accessed with consent. So you actually break down the, you know, the chunks, and I give my consent for certain services. So it might be, yes, you can have my consent to access this health data if it's going to enhance, you know, certain, you know, help, you know, the fight against certain, you know, diseases or whatever. Or yes, you know, if it means that actually we, you know, we can get you know, better access to better things. I mean, you know, from an R&D perspective, from a farmer, and I get some, you know, utility from that, you know, I'll give access. It's that concept of a user-centric, you know, decision making on that data sharing. It was open source through Solid. He's now turned it into a private company called Inrupt. They're currently raising money. Keep an eye on this. I think this is really quite exciting and quite fascinating. There's also DigiMe, who've been around for a little while. They do a similar thing in that space, and that's come from the guys that created eBay. But it's this concept of these personal, you know, online device, personal sort of information stores, if you like, and giving consent to those. So I think that's fascinating, interesting, and it all points to my last slide, which is another theme I'm seeing, another topic, and that's the rise of data ethics, which goes right back to the very first thing that I raised, which is, well, yes, we have a law, and data protection means so many different things to so many people, and it's very difficult to govern and regulate. And people often ask me, well, what's the difference, Geoff, between privacy law and privacy ethics? And all I'm going to say is that, in my mind, the simplest way is data protection laws provide a right to do something. Okay, they govern the acceptable standards. They provide, you know, almost a bedrock of you know, you have the right to do this thing. Ethics is more the practice of doing the right thing. These are the socially acceptable things, that the moral values that we weave into our society. And I'm seeing more and more and more, or having more and more conversations with people saying, actually, we want to develop a code of practice. and get to that code for ethics. And I'm going to quote one of my peers here, but a journey to code is definitely, I think, what we're on now, and that's something I'm expecting to see it really bloom in 2021. There are a number of codes of practice being developed, both within organizations, and within institutional practices. We've seen the Turing Institute doing a lot of work currently with the ICO and a lot of research, particularly in the field of AI. So there's a lot of driver there, and how we get machines to operate in a more ethical, how we get those considerations built in. UK finance, I know, so the banks and insurance industries that are members of that are developing a code of practice around data ethics, as have the World Federation for Advertising and also the ISBA more locally within the UK. And we have the Open Data Institute, who've developed a sort of an ethics canvas, so it's kind of a wheel of measuring kind of where you are on that ethical practice. As I said, it's often driven by automation. It's often also driven by user experience and your brand proposition. Edelman Trust Barometer, its publication is due at the end of this month, so this is kind of a little bit based on last year, but last year's Trust Barometer from Edelman indicated a threefold increase in brand value based on ethic and trust and ethic and integral behavior. So trust is, broadly, they measure a number of things around your competence and also how you behave ethically and how people perceive that. And a 1 point uplift in your kind of integral position and your ethical position actually leads to a threefold increase in your brand value and the number of sales and how much people trust you in that turnover. So they're starting to build a direct business link for businesses. So I'm starting to see a set of design principles that are starting to be evolved, and I'm starting to be asked more and more. Now, there's not a lot out there really. It's still an emerging area, and if you go to Harvard, I've done quite a lot of Harvard University, have done quite a lot of work on privacy, and they've created a privacy wheel. I think there's about 32 different factors, and they then break down into hundreds, and there's this great big, I've simplified it on this slide into 4 things because I'm a simple man and I like to keep things simple. But for me, if people ask me about ethics and data, I break it into 4 things, and they are around respect. So respect to the human. So, considering a human-centered design, individual control, respect my rights, and also respect the fact that the reason why I want to process and share this data and give you this data is I actually want something. I want to be able to try and improve my status or my situation. I want to be treated equally and fairly. So, removal of any bias, limit the reuse, without my control, kind of recognize the diversity and the impacts and avoid dark patterns. I'll just, if anyone wants to learn a little bit more about the sort of things that happen in the privacy world, if you look at the hashtag dark patterns, these are a thing. This is when websites are socially engineered to gather more personal data about you than they should. That's called a dark pattern. There is a website that you can follow it on Instagram and Twitter, hashtag dark patterns. There are some fascinating things put on that wall every day. And Mark Zuckerberg has a dark pattern named after him. It's called Zuckering. Okay, but so they are actually categorized. So, but if you've got a bit of pastime and you want to look at something that's quite fun, that's always quite an interesting thing to look at. But yeah, treat people equally and fairly, remove bias, and check that in your testing and your modeling of systems that you haven't created any bias in there unintentionally. Transparency, massive. We need to become more open, and that isn't. I know it's quite difficult for businesses because we need to protect IP. And our own intelligence and our own rights, but an element of trying to be able to be transparent and explain how things are used. And if you can't explain an algorithm, it's how do you know you can trust it? And it's I know it's a difficult thing, but clarity on the use of data, I think needs to be. I think we just need to get away from these concepts and this perception of these kind of opaque operating models, because it's not helpful. And then there's accountability. So this is really being able to give people choice, control, and redress, and all the good things. Getting design principles in there that support the processing of data. I think I've overrun my half an hour. I was speeding up at the end.
Geoff, don't. No need to apologise. I was just thinking you've only delivered 4 slides, but just individually, I'm bursting with questions.
That's good. That's good.
Absolutely. you certainly lived up to the expectations that
Okay, thank you. So now there isn't any questions slot. If anyone's got any questions, I mean, and if there's anyone, I know I've thrown a lot of information out there. If anyone has anything that comes to mind, by all means, you can reach out to me on that email address. But yeah, Q&A.
Yeah, so I'll jump in and sort of take chair's privilege, if you like.
Okay, go for
one
it.
of the things I noticed, and very close to what Doug have been doing, is this idea of codes of practice, and we've actually adopted what he didn't mention, which is from the Office of Statistics Regulation and their code of practice for the delivery of statistics, and that's particularly because we're focusing on behaviours of analysts, really,
Right.
within teams, and that seems more relevant. Whereas a lot of the other ones are around, if you like, codes of practice for the use of data rather than the delivery of analytics. But I happily enable you to reference that one as well, because we found that really helpful, and they're trying to build a community around it. It's the it's the behaviours that organizations have to do if they're going to generate official statistics, but they also have this role called voluntary adoption, where you can, and they've been certainly open to us adjusting what's being framed around appropriate for government bodies to us adjusting it for commercial sectors. I found that really.
I'd be very interested to follow that up, actually, Tim, because that is exactly.
As someone who won't even join the family WhatsApp group, much to the rest of the family's resistance, I might see if I can convert them over to Signal. But I was interested, going really on. You talked about e-privacy having an impact on big tech, and I was interested in where you thought that could be. I've not associated it with big tech.
Right. Well, it's more. Well, as I say, big tech. It's more in relation to their business models in relation to the data sharing on cookies.
Right.
And specifically Google Analytics, because often Google Analytics is dropped as a third-party cookie in most sites, and for many e-commerce companies, there's a derivative. There's an income from getting clicks, getting Google clicks, etc. That's a bit murkier under the provision as I've seen it so far in the e-privacy, because that would require consent, or it might actually have an instant blocker within the browser setting I'm using. So that actually challenges that business model, and it's partly why the e-privacy reg has taken a while to get going, because it's been very vehemently lobbied by that community, and it has a similar impact on the others as well. It has an impact on the Facebook pixel,
right?
Okay, so that's where I'm seeing it, and it's seeing, and there are a number of concerns. The regulators are particularly concerned about the opacity in that model, and actually that. If you look at real-time bidding particularly, I mean, that is a broadcast, that is an invisible broadcast of stuff that I've done because I clicked on a cookie because I was trying to buy something, and I'll get rid of that. I trust this company that I'm with. I trust this, particular hotelier that I'm booking a hotel with. I'll just accept it. But actually, it's exposed me to all these other things. And,
the ICO sort of, I mean, didn't the ICO sort of declare that almost as non-compliant? But then they seem to
They did, and then so the IAB they've started to work on some standards to move it there. But I still think I'd still have some concerns around the way it's operating. I don't think I still think it's unclear, and it leaves exposure for what regulation is there around setting up as a data broker and absorbing all that data and then closing down? What stops me doing that? What stops me setting up a DSP, or a fake site or something that's going to absorb that? So that's a concern.
Yeah, as other people notice, I could carry on asking a whole bunch of questions here. If somebody would like to, I've got two questions here from Nick Beerman, but they're not in the Q&A, so I can't see them at the moment. Jan, can you pass them in? Just mention them. I can't hear you, Jan.
What can I?
There you go. I'm a professional, honestly. I couldn't find the unmute button. I apologise. It's from Nick Beerman. I think you should have it in your chat, Geoff.
All right.
Otherwise, I'll read it out to you. Do you see
it? Yes, I can see it now. Yeah.
Do you have a good look at links, etc.? Also across good reports by marker. Okay. Yes. Also, do we need a balance of reason against being overly scared, concerned if I find it? Right. Yes. So some good, good point. So the question is, do I have a good list of resources with links, etc.? Yes, I can share. I can share, links to things around, particularly around some of that dig the new breed activity. And I've got some links to some reading material if anyone wants them on kind of progressing, the ongoing conversation around data transfers and what that means. Yes, happy to share that with this community.
Are you happy to share the slides? Because
yeah, absolutely. You can have those. Yeah, those are yours. That's fine.
Okay.
And am I? Then there's a question here around. Also, how do we balance the need for privacy against being overly scared and concerned? Yeah, that's good. There is a lot of pessimism out there, and yeah, there's a lot, and it's like anything really. I think, particularly with the interconnection of technology these days, that someone has an opinion and then that becomes fact. And I'm all for a balanced opinion. I'm not looking to demonize anyone, and I know I've talked about the big four there. I'm not looking to demonize them. I mean, what happened with the technology revolution, it economically saved us from the disaster of the banking collapse. So I've got no gripe there. It's really around how we all work together in a gathering of the tribe to get to the best place. So how do we balance that? I think we need to see privacy as an enabler. So it's a trust enabler. Okay, it can get really depressing. It can get almost dystopian in your mind. You can start to think, am I living in an Orwellian state here? Are there cameras looking at everything I'm doing? And I think that just comes, with greater awareness now. And that's probably my biggest disappointment, actually, as a practitioner. So I'll put my hand up and I'll take some accountability. Following the delivery of GDPR in 2018, I don't think there's been, and without sounding like I'm having the ICO as well, I don't think there's been a sufficient public awareness program on personal data and how to use it. And it's twofold. You give people rights, but you need to educate them on what that really means. And unfortunately, inevitably, what we saw there, I mean, I've worked in organizations where you see that weaponization of rights. Everyone wants a data subject access request because they want to find something that they can complain about, or they just want to weaponize it to make your life difficult. And I think we just need to get to a better place of making people more aware, running educational programs in school and kind of getting, evolving the debate societally around, this data is for all of it. I mean, the National Health Service data, I think personally, I like to see it as a commonwealth for all of us. It's a common treasury for everyone on this island, and we should all benefit from that. And I think that's a conversation that, I would like to see, and I would like to see more of that in the media rather than, privacy concerns about this. I would rather see that, that kind of empowerment that enables people to really own and use their data, because I think that demand's there.
Brilliant.
I hope that was.
As I say, I'm going to resist the temptation of carrying on because we've got Ron coming shortly to talk about mapping, which is close to Doug's heart, and also I'm going to give Gary a couple of minutes, and then we'll have a short break where we can relieve ourselves or whatever, get a cup of coffee before we come back at 1:30 to Ron. But thank you, Geoff, for stimulating so many thoughts that I'm going to shut up because I could ask you so many more questions.